Hello, this is week 7, be the only video this week. Clearly you have to finish your reading by Athanasius on the Incarnation and write your paper this week, so I don't want to overwhelm you. But this week we're taking a shift away from the Christology and Trinitarian studies we've been doing, and we're looking at more of a soteriology, that is salvation issues, and anthropology, the nature of humanity. So this also takes us into the West. Much of our previous discussions have been taking place in the East, and the Western Church was clearly contributing to that. But now this conversation goes to the West, the Western Church, the Latin-speaking church in the 4th and 5th century. And in the end, the Eastern Church did not necessarily agree with the outcomes of the discussion on Pelagianism and Augustine's theology. And by the way, I say Augustine because that's just the way my brain's wired from the town in Florida, St. Augustine. If you're more theologically astute, you say Augustine. I just never got around to doing that. So anyways, today we're going to look at the theology of Pelagius and how Augustine responded. Your textbooks did a great job on this. I just want to reinforce some things we've already talked about in regards to our nature, our ability to sin or not to sin, and free will. And this video sets us up for our conversation in the live session on Friday. So with that, let me share my document with you. And this is this document says that it says HTH 703, Patristic and Medieval Theology. This is the document I wrote for this same class that I taught for the seminary level, where we covered patristic and medieval theology. So I am just using it. And I'm not going to cover the life of Augustine here. I'll put it in the notes, in the files, in the webpage, so you can look this over. But Augustine's an amazing person. Of all church fathers, Augustine is probably the most famous in the West. And our theology is probably more influenced by him than any other church father. And he's more controversial than any other church father because of that. The Catholic Church has made him a saint, and they have followed his teaching on ecclesiology. The Reformed Church doesn't make saints, but they follow his his theology on soteriology. So he's an amazing man, worth reading on. But I just want to deal a little bit with Pelagianism. And if you want to do some further study on this, there's a book by R.C. Sproul. It's right here in my notes. R.C. Sproul, called Willing to Believe, The Controversy Over Free Will. It is a great historical survey from the early days all the way up to the modern days on what different figures have taught, theological figures have taught on free will. It's a great survey. R.C. Sproul is a great communicator. But let's just talk about Pelagius. And he firmly believed in free will. And like I said, we're going to introduce a few things today, but we're going to talk more about this Friday on the live show. So get ready on that day, not the live show, but the live session. Get ready on that day to talk about your definition of free will. So Pelagius, like most people who became heretics, did set out to do that. They thought they were following the logical understanding of Scripture and what made sense to them. So these were good people who brought out doctrines that turned out to be terribly false and were condemned for it. So let's just quickly review Pelagius. Your textbooks have done this, but I want to do it. Pelagius believed that God's highest attributes are his righteousness and justice. So in the end, Pelagius did not have a God that was in a close relationship with people, like I believe that the Bible teaches. More of the righteous judge. Pelagius believed everything God created is good, which we would agree with. But the second one, there are line number 3, as created, nature cannot be changed essentially. So when God made Adam and Eve good, that couldn't be changed. Where Augustine's doctrine and modern doctrine of both the Catholic and the Protestant Church is, yes, it did change drastically. Number 4, human nature is indestructibly good. Disagree with that. Sin comes from satanic snares and sensuous lusts. So I wouldn't disagree with that. I think James chapter 1 would say that is true as far as sensuous lusts. Number 6, There can be sinless men. Completely disagree with that. When Paul says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, there's none righteous, no, not one, Romans chapter 3. So I'm not sure where he got that from. 7, Adam was created with free will and natural holiness. I would agree with that, but I would call it untested holiness. That when it was tested, he failed. Number 8, Adam sinned through free will. Agreed again. Number 9, neither Adam's sin nor guilt was transmitted to his progeny. I would disagree with that. I don't like to use the phrase original sin. That's a Catholic phrase. It doesn't mean it's not true. I just don't use it. But from Romans chapter 5, I see that Adam's sin was passed on to us, and we're condemned for it. And Christ's righteousness is passed on to us, and it makes us alive. So I would disagree with number 9 in Pelagius's thinking. 10, all men are created as Adam was before the fall. Completely disagree with that. There's no need for the cross then, which Pelagius downplayed the cross. Number 11, the habit of sinning weakens the will. Agree with that in principle, but Pelagius took it too far. 12, the grace of God facilitates goodness, but is not necessary to achieve it. And again, I think this is so wrongheaded. Ephesians chapter 2, by grace you have been saved through faith. So grace is the foundation of all relationship with God. It is essential. And of course, I think Pelagius' definition and Augustine's definition are very different on what grace is. 13, the grace of God's law illumines and instructs. So Pelagius saw the law as a good thing for us today, because his basic belief about God is his righteousness and justice, which the law brings forth. And last, number 14, grace is given according to justice and merit. So I think, again, that misses the big picture, that God's grace is given to me because of my deep, deep need for it. I am lost and essentially cannot solve my sin problem, but God's grace relieves that. So in the end, Pelagianism teaches that the will is unaffected by Adam's sin. This is the question we're going to discuss Friday. What is free will? So think about that hard, and we'll have a great discussion on Friday. At the Ecumenical Council of Ephesus in 431, Pelagianism was condemned. We also saw the 2 other councils in your textbook that were not ecumenical councils. They also condemned Pelagius's teaching. So you'll read that. So let's go down here. I want to talk about this idea of the Latin phrase. We talked about it early in the semester. I just want to review it again for our discussion on Friday. And that is right here. God is non posse peccare. Latin, not possible to sin. So God cannot sin. It's not possible for him to sin. God is the only perfect being in all his, God is not only perfect in all his attributes, he is immutably so. So God can't change in his perfection and inability to sin. But mankind is not immutable. We change. So here's how Augustine used these phrases. Like I said, we dealt with this the first or second week. We're revisiting it now. So before the fall, according to Augustine, mankind is posse non peccare, possible not to sin. Did you see the difference between us and God? God was non posse peccare. That is, it's not possible for God to sin. But humans, before the fall, Adam and Eve, it was possible for them not to sin and possible for them to sin. That's why I said before the fall, their holiness was untested. But when they were tested, they failed. And not only was it possible for them to sin, they did sin. Now we have post-fall. After Adam and Eve have sinned, they've been excluded from the garden. They're starting to have children. It is now non posse, non peccare, not possible not to sin. This would suggest their nature has changed, and now what naturally comes out of them is sin. It's not saying that they sin every time they were tempted. So don't read that into it. Don't read this idea of total depravity, which is a Reformed teaching, not Augustine's words. of which sin affects every area of our being, doesn't mean we are utterly depraved, that we always do the worst. That's not true. But in the end, humanity, after the fall of Adam and Eve, before Christ, non passe, non peccare, it's not possible for us not to sin. Mankind can still choose to do whatever they choose to do. It's our decision. All decisions in choosing have something to do with our nature. And that's what I want to talk to you about Friday on free will. Think about that. How do our natures affect our ability to choose? We freely choose to sin, which is our nature. And last, post-fall, it is unavoidable to not sin. So that is Augustine's teaching on humans after the fall, non-peccare or non-passe, non-peccare. But in Christ, once you become saved, you're regenerated, you're born again, then we get to passe non peccare, that is possible not to sin, or passe peccare, possible to sin. So it's been restored to me the ability not to sin with the power of God in me. It's all his grace empowering me to do that. My new nature. So once that's been restored to me, it's possible for me not to sin. It's also possible for me to sin. And that's the nature of everyday life for a Christian, the battle to do what is right in God's eyes that he has enabled me to do. But then the last stage is in glory. And that is, it will become once again not possible to sin. Sin will be removed, the devil will be in the lake of fire, and we will be utterly redeemed, stand holy and blameless before our God, and it will not be possible to sin. So at that point, our holiness will be confirmed because it is the nature of Christ given to me. It will be confirmed forever. I will be raised from the dead. And not only is my soul, my heart, my mind renewed, my body is fully renewed. And sin is no part of who I am or who you are. So that's Augustine's theology. I want you to hold on to that as you read your textbooks and as you read the primary source readings on this. And what I really want to discuss on Friday is the idea of, let me stop sharing this as I do this. What I really want to discuss on Friday is what exactly is free will. When we say people have free will, does that mean they can do whatever they want? And where does the concepts of God's sovereignty and predestination and election and all that come in? And then the idea of my free will in choosing to believe. Is that God's work or is that my work? This is a fascinating topic. So I look forward to our discussion on Friday, and I really hope you can all make it. So we'll see you then.